This is episode number 7 with Nicolas Turchi. Welcome to the Archiologist Talks. The Archiologist is a collaborative platform that focuses on showcasing worldwide design projects from students and young professionals. This time around, though, we're creating a space to talk about design with the leading architects and designers around the world. Our goal for these conversations is to inspire and influence the young community. We're going to bring in tips, personal insights, and different perspectives of what design really is to each one of us. And I'm your host, Maria Flores. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Archiologist. And today, it's raining. I don't know if you actually hear the rain, but it's raining quite hard. And I'm just drinking my tea over here. But today we have Nicolas Turchi. He is currently a designer at Zaha Hadid Architects, and he holds a master's in architecture from Harvard and also a bachelor from the University of Bologna. He has worked for very different firms, including Eisenman, Hernandez Alonso. He has worked with Cucinella Architects and so on. And Nicolas is actually interested in emergent technologies and how they affect the theoretical aspect of the discipline. He has been studying the relationship between architecture and philosophy and actually graduated with a thesis on time and space in architecture. How interesting is that? For today's episode, we're going to be talking to him about why it's so important for him and for you to expose yourself to new circumstances, new cultures, new places, new ideologies, new everything in order to stay ahead. We talk about how his different backgrounds from Italy to London to the United States and to London again has impacted him so much. And we talk about why he loves working at Zaha Hadid Architects, and he gives us some insight into his thesis project and a lifelong obsession, which has become time and space for him. We also talk about great lengths about how you should always bring something from outside of the discipline to have a more well-rounded profession, and how parametricism is becoming a new norm, but how we as designers should always stay above the term and not let the computer design for us, nor have parametric design for the sake of being innovative or quote-unquote parametric and cool. He believes that parametric workflows can actually make the designer and the project more efficient and have better performance. It's a very interesting conversation. I'm really excited about it. I hope you all enjoy it. Let the talk begin. Hi, Nicolas.
Hi, Maria.
How are you? It's so nice to finally meet you. Actually, you know what I remember? That you were one of the few people that followed us in the beginning. You were one of the first followers. I remember. I remember seeing your name.
This is great. Yeah, I mean, I love the contents of your page, and it's great to be here today. I'm glad you asked me to join.
Thank you. All right, so tell me a little bit about yourself. You've been to a lot of places. University-wise, you went to the University of Bologna, then to Harvard, right?
Yeah.
And now you're working at Zaha Hadid Architects, but you've worked with a lot of other architects before, right?
Yeah, no, that's correct. I would say that I just concluded, well, actually, let me correct this. I'm never really concluded my education period. As I'm still in that first part of the career, although I just graduated from Harvard, as you mentioned. I always try to look at this period of my life as a period of exposure. So in every sense, that's the reason why I travel a lot, trying to get exposed to different cultures, so traveling to different countries, trying to get exposure to different methods in working in a practice. And that's why I work in several practices, some of them like perhaps the Hernandez Alonso or Eisenman more.
Really? You worked there?
Yeah. Briefly worked there.
That's awesome.
And that was really great because that felt like the sort of boutique, practice experience where you had almost a one-on-one experience with the principal, which was great. But then at the same time, it is true that I try to combine that experience with a more different one. The place I'm working right now at Zaha counts about 350 people or 400 in total. So it feels more like a big company.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say that I'm that period of my life where I've been trying to do this, to mix up different experiences and trying to get the most out of them. Trying also to understand what I like, what it fits me, and what not. And this is also true for education, I would say, because I'm coming from a very weird background in a sense that I started in art school when I was super young, in my teenage, and then I decided to do architecture, and I studied at the University of Bologna, as you mentioned before, which was a very good school in term of giving you very strong basis in the discipline. But on the other hand, it was a very conservative school. So I was lucky enough that I got there with some kind of critical reasoning coming from before getting that sort of exposure in an art school. And then I was able to say, okay, after 5 years in this school, I want to see what's outside. I want to see something else. And then I applied to the US schools, and I ended up going to Harvard, which was great. But I would say the most important thing was getting there with already sort of like a pattern in education,
Right.
so with some scope, right? So I went there that I already kind of had almost clear in mind the research that I want to pursue. So the program I got in was an MR2. It gave me enough flexibility to build my own curricula and follow my interest already. So I think that was the most important part. It wasn't just because of Harvard. It wasn't just because of University of Bologna. It was because of kind of this building up of experiences. And of course, while I was in Bologna, there was like 5 super long years. I tried, like once in a while, I interrupted with some very different experiences. I studied in England 1 year at the University of West of England, and then
Really? That's cool.
which was very interesting because at that time, as I said before, it was like coming from a one way of thinking architecture, and just trying to open up your mind and getting exposure was really all about that. So I really believe in this sort of a first part of your life where you're absorbing, and then there is a moment where you feel like you can also give back something. Of course,
right.
I'm not a believer of like like fixed terms way of thinking. So you will learn till you die, but in a way there is this first part of your life where you're really trying to expose yourself and get as much as possible to build the person you'll be. So that was my case.
Yeah. What made you decide that you wanted to go to the United States?
Well, that came with time, and of course the experience that I had with Eisenman before. Like he's both a practitioner and an educator, and he in a way he exposed me to that word. For sure, one thing that I must say about the US way of teaching is that I found it way more open-minded than the one I was used to back in Europe, specifically in Italy. And then this opened up to me an entire new world. So I said, yeah, as I mentioned before, after this 5 years where I built strong basis in the discipline, if we are talking about scientific subjects, but even history of architecture, I think Italian universities are very, very valid. But at the same time, I felt like I needed to get the freedom to explore a bit more. And you will notice I'm not one of those persons who's saying like, yeah, freedom for the sake of freedom. I don't agree with that. But I think there is a certain moment where you feel mature enough to start to build your own research. And Harvard was the perfect platform for that.
Yeah, I like how you talk about your life in the sense that, the first years of, life are the ones that should give you the freedom to explore the options around you. And that's why, you went to the University of Bologna, you stayed in Italy, then you move to the United States, and now you're in London. It's almost as if, you can make any mistakes, and it's okay because you're learning through the mistakes anyway. And I have realized that a lot of designers, they're very stuck on, okay, I have to go to school, then work, and then I have to, somehow be rich in like a second. So it's like that possibility of exploring, because perhaps what you want to do is not really what you will gonna end up doing in the rest of your life.
Absolutely. No,
So.
that's absolutely true. And I feel like if I go back, I would do almost all I did in terms of education. Like now I'm saying, yeah, that I spent 5 years in a very conservative school, but like looking back, that was really important at some point, to kind of trigger something in me and saying, okay, I need to see more, and then getting me the possibility to have that amazing experience in the US as well. So definitely.
Yeah. So tell me more about the research that you're doing now. You mentioned that it was related to time with Henri Bergson. Tell me who Henri Bergson is and what the research is about.
So time has always been a theme that I've been obsessed with. It is true that everything started in a way with Henri Bergson. This French philosopher that I got in touch when I was finishing my undergrad studies. So he became part of my final thesis in a very natural way. At that time, I was working on this museum of mobility and transportation, right? So one thing that I tend to do very often is, I have a brief or I have some hints from the context. I'm starting a project from scratch. I just try to absorb these hints, put them together instead of like considering strictly one by one, as you probably would do in a normal practice. I start to kind of wander in between, right? So the idea there came with the very basic idea of like the constructing. I was doing mobility. At this mobility and transportation museum, so I thought about the idea of mobility itself and thought about the idea of movement, and then split it down into its measure components, right? So space and time. Movement is basically a change through space within time. And then Bergson came to my mind. At that time, I was reading one of his books, and his idea of time as in contrast with what the Newtonian time was before. So this kind of like plain mathematical structure. He was trying to oppose this idea of a duality in time. So on one hand, you would have of course, the mathematical aspect, which is totally rational and built by human beings, so completely artificial. And on the other hand, you have the subjective aspect of that. So what he calls the time of consciousness, right? He divides it into scientific time and time of consciousness. So those two components became the major themes informing my building. So my building was this tension in between these two forces, and it was nice how all of this reflected somehow in the program of the building itself. So in a museum you have different programs, and then part of it has to do with the organization. You have the ticket box and all of these places, and then on the other hand you have the experience itself where you just wander through galleries. And so I wanted to play a bit with these two themes, giving them a shape, a language, and then letting the user experience that. So that was the very beginning of this, and then I found myself completely absorbed in this research about time. I believe it's also because architecture has always been focusing on space, right? While I think we can say that in the last century, for sure, we have been seeing a shift towards a more experiential architecture.
Yeah.
More and more. I can think about people who theorize that, and in important books, I tend to refer many times to Gideon, and he's an historian, but he was the first embedding the concept of zeitgeist from Hegel in his theatise, and saying you need to be, you need to keep up with your time in order, and not being detached from it, in order to deliver a message that is still valuable and it will be in the future. And he was an historian, so it's not anymore the figure of that historian that is like a collector of past events and just trying to pass them by. So that was a first start. And then after that, I think the discipline really got the message in a way that we like nowadays we see many practices starting this in-between approaches, kind of hybrid practices, working with temporary buildings, pavilions. There is so many evidence to me of this big shift that I'm still trying to build on a theoretical aspect, for sure, more theoretical aspects, but like other people did that before them. I can think about Greg Lane for sure. I can think about Bernard Schumi in very different ways. One common like one aspect that they all have in common is for sure that they were addicted to interdisciplinarity. They have different passions. They had something coming out of the discipline, and they merged it within the discipline in order to enrich it. And that's another aspect that to me is super important. I've always been obsessed with philosophy, physics, and other disciplines, as well as architecture. Still, in a hierarchy, architecture is my first passion and obsession. I really can't help bringing in different fields.
Right. So you think that a successful designer is the one that is able to bring things that are not really related to architecture per se, like philosophy, psychology, into the field to make the experience for the user better?
I wouldn't say that you need to do that in order to be a good designer. There have been amazing designers, and there are amazing designers who, perhaps unconsciously, they embed something. They don't really recognize that, but they do. I think that's something that is really tough to keep aside when you are an architect, because when you're an architect, a designer, you devote yourself 100% to the discipline, and it's really difficult to separate it to who you are, right? So I would say that's my approach. In my approach, there is almost no distinction between the architect and who I am, right? I cannot design something if I don't feel it myself. I would feel in contradiction with myself, and then I couldn't, even defend the project. And that happened to me so many times. When you go through design workflow, especially in the education, then you are asked to change stuff during tutoring sessions and all of that. You get to a point where you're like, okay, I don't recognize this anymore. How am I supposed to defend it? And then I had to bring in drastical decisions, because this is one of my priorities. So that's a way that I work. And for sure, to me, being an interdisciplinary designer means to bring fresh air into the discipline, to include interests and passions that otherwise will be left apart. And that's absolutely an enriching moment. It means basically turning what you love in what in what you do at some point, and vice versa. So yeah, I would say so. That's my approach, and I would always defend it. I will never impose it.
I think it is a great approach, and I think it happens more when you don't really realize, like how you're saying that you're focusing on a particular topic, but when you have a project and you start analyzing, let's say, the site or the social aspects of the site, you encounter these interdisciplinary topics that arise, and then you put them into the architecture. So I think that most architects do it, but it is hard, as you're saying, to do it when you have an office, being so focused on research, but also on the architecture portion. It's almost like the office of OMA, where they have AMO, where the research part of the office is gives information to the architecture office in a way. I think that is a very beautiful way to understand architecture and design in general.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, in the practical world, it might be difficult sometimes. I can also think about those who just started a practice and they not always can embed their own research, their own interest in the project. But at the same time, I would say that we are also living in a world and in a period that is offering us many opportunities. We're living in a world where we are asked to find out new creative ways of respond to many issues that are raising at the moment that we never faced before. So there is also this, I think there is a question about how can we be creative, still being practical, and for sure interdisciplinary to me is one of the answers.
Yeah. Yeah, and even in professional practices, I mean, it is hard to have a client and you wanting to be creative when the client only wants what they want, and it's kind of like, how do you explain to them that the creative way is the best, because for them it's going to be always about practicality.
Yeah, that's true. Although I must say, I don't know if that's because I'm working right now in a practice like Zaha Hadid, but we had to deal with clients who were actually looking for originality. I mean, I guess that the fact that they were approaching Zaha Hadid Architects, they were already in a certain mood, right? They would be willing to spend money on some, like new approach or whatever it could mean. But yeah, I've seen some clients very interested in actually this aspect specifically. Like, what are you adding to it? Why am I choosing you? You're bringing something new. You're bringing some new fresh air, and eventually this is the best value you can bring into the project. I guess it depends on the situation.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how in the design community you're basically known as the parametric designer, right? You have done workshops for computational design. How do you feel about parametric design? I mean, do you work on it for Zaha Hadid Architects? And is this a part of your research as well?
That's a very dangerous question to ask to me. Well, I mean, I know what Patrick thinks about parametricism. This is how he would talk about it. To me, well, I always consider so computation and a parametric approach, they're all tools of way of working. I don't see the final goal into having a fully parametric project. That's just on the practical side to me. And I think for sure these tools are a big revolution for the field. I was listening to Arturo's podcast as well, and I agree with him. That's a tool, and it really depends how you use it. I would discourage anyone getting into parametric design because they want to design some kind of I don't know, cool pavilion with openings that change. That's not the point to me. That's on the practical side. You need to have clear in mind a specific agenda. So why you're using a certain tool. That's to me that's way more important. So all the workshop that I taught so far, somehow they had to do with time. So that's my interest, as we mentioned before. I use because of course parametricism. I wouldn't say parametricism. I would just say parametric workflow is something that allows you to go back, tweak certain components, get different results, optimize for sure. And so all of that is super important. But I can still see more on the practical side than I'm constantly working on the theoretical side as well, trying to pair like the digital revolution with what it could eventually mean to a designer, an architect, and trying to draw links to, society, philosophy, whatever. So I also have my personal theory of why we are now encountering parametric design as one of the main, ism, if we consider parametricism at the moment. It came after we had modernism, we had postmodernism, which was a total rejection of it, and then at some point we had a more mature reaction to it, which is parametricism. With the big difference with modernism is that although people like Patrick, they are calling for this kind of hegemony of the style, parametricism is all about adaptiveness, is all about going back and correct mistakes that has been during the process, which I think it wasn't part of modernism. So I think that's an evolution in a way, but so I can still see even the time component in it, but that's not what I'm very much interested in. So if something that I do kind of resemble the parametric design features that you can see somewhere else, that's not because I'm trying to be parametric. That's because it's coming from a specific agenda for some reason within the tools. So I recently taught this workshop with Design Morphine in Italy, and it was called the Time Machine. It was all about using Maya. So through animation, so playing with the time slider and basically building up this vocabulary based on the workflow that would deploy time as a design tool at the end of the day. So in a way, it's similar to, it is a parametric approach, because you can always go back and keyframe something differently, changing some parameters. But to me, that's not the main point, right? I think also these new tools that they're raising, and I found it very interesting, going back to the concept of interdisciplinarity, the fact that many of these new tools, new software, are coming actually from a different discipline, from a different field. They are not designed for architects, but architects are using them in a very creative way. And that's to me,
it's like for video games,
for instance,
like
exactly,
Unreal.
Yeah, absolutely. VR, AR are of course part of the discussion. Gaming technologies, movie industry technology, I can think about, of course, Maya and Houdini. They're coming from other industries, and I find it very compelling that architects are willing to explore with them. The crucial message to me is that they shouldn't drive your agenda, right? I found it almost naturally. I started to work with Maya because I was interested in time, right? And that was an animation software. So I had that interest coming from whatever, my own experiences, my research from before. And then I moved into learning a software that would allow me to explore more about that. But I didn't learn Maya because, I wanted to do some Zaha-ish stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I was going to say that that's one of the mistakes that a lot of designers make when they refer to the parametricism that we see today, that it is only about cool forms. But as how you're explaining it, parametric design and parametric workflows is about making the design better, tweaking it, retweaking it on the computer with these softwares. And it doesn't mean that you're just doing a cool form, but if anything, you're giving information to the design process and the idea.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely.
There was a question that they asked on Instagram that I thought it was very interesting, which is, in parametric design, is the concept and idea creation random? Do you control that? And I know what your answer is going to be, but let's answer that.
Well, I think I already partially answered this question with my strong statement from before. Absolutely, it's not random. I'm completely against any random solution. I feel that sometimes within a specific playground. You're allowed to be playful, and you're
Mm-hmm.
learning a software, you are exploring. That's part of it, and that's all fine. But when it comes to architecture, with a capital A, we can't just be playing around with software. That's not the way I would do, honestly. And as I said before, if you have a specific agenda, or you're building it up, and you
Mm-hmm.
want to, the software becomes a tool and also a way of informing partially this agenda as well. So it's also true that, taking my case as an example, once I started playing with certain software, of course, it's not that like my design didn't get affected by it. Of course it did, but it was this sort of like mutual transformation. So agenda would develop on a parallel way with my skills in a specific software. So yeah, it's not random. It's not random at all. It's not random at all. And I think, as we said before, there is much more. There would be much more to say about it, but then we don't want to get too philosophical in here. But
Yeah.
even whenever it looks like it's random, in my opinion, it is not. I mean, you are doing something, and there is a specific reason behind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you believe that parametric workflows and using all these softwares, does it make the process of designing simpler for the architect, or does it make it more complex?
Mm, I would say that, well, it depends here how we define complexity, of course. But
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just staying on a basic level, I would say that again, parametric design, one of the value for sure is to work towards optimization, and
Mm-hmm.
so even in a practice, adopting a parametric workflow, you can really benefit from it. I don't see any downside of it, because you can keep your creativity. As I said before, I refer again to Arturo when he says you're still sketching on your paper, right?
Yeah.
And that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. That doesn't mean you can't realize that within a parametric workflow. You can either or not, but maybe if you do, then the time that you change your mind, especially in an office where that happens very often, maybe you don't,
Mm-hmm.
but your boss does. Having kept this parametric workflow could save your life. That's true. So yeah, I wouldn't say that it is going to make design more complex or less complex. It's not about that. It could help, and it could work towards optimization.
What about how has been your experience working at Zaha Hadid Architects? Because I know a lot of people are wondering what it is like to work at a big firm like this one that has many different locations. How has your experience been? I know you already said that it's a very corporate office. It has more than 300 people working, but how is your experience so far?
Well, I've been working there for almost 1 year now, and
Mm-hmm.
so I'm still pretty new to the company.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that one of the great aspect of that is, as you mentioned, is a bit like being in a corporate, but at the same time is not like being in a corporate. Like, you can really feel the atmosphere. You can feel the Zaha signature is still there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's nice. It's very interesting to be in a corporate firm, let's call it that way, that at the same time is
Mm-hmm.
keeping a sort of a signature and a way of thinking, a way of operating. So it's again a sort of in between, which is really I really like. I'm always kind of this in between guy, and I feel like I found a place where this in between really, uh, you know, stands out the final work. So I found myself working on several competitions, and we were competing with many corporate firms,
That's
uh,
awesome.
and we like every firm try to focus on his strengths, and for sure Zaha Hadid Architects, they know what their strengths are. And one of them is, yes, they are an organized firm. There are about 400 people working there. There is a strong hierarchy for sure. Otherwise, they wouldn't survive after what happened. But I would say they're getting stronger and stronger, which is really meaningful. But at the same time, they have a clear agenda in mind, and they know, they've been going through it for many years, so they know how to run a practice, keeping a certain aesthetic, certain rules. No, definitely, that's, I think, one of the strengths of the company, and working there is enjoyable in that sense. You really feel part of this, which is good.
That's nice. That's nice. Do you have any? This is the last question, by the way. Do you have any advice for students right now regarding, let's say, how they should go about looking for a postgraduate degree, how they should move about applying to these big firms, depending on your experience? What is a piece of advice that you would give a student right now?
Well, I like this question because it's kind of closing the circle with the first one in a way. Going back to my personal experience, since, as I said before, I would exactly do what I did, I would advise everyone to try and follow what they feel, what they think, trying to, but at the same time, be humble in a way to expose themselves to even to the unexpected. So trying different experiences, even though they might think, okay, I'm kind of I'm a parametric guy. I mean, I don't like this term, but let's say there might be many thinking, okay, I want to do parametric. Well, keep in mind that architecture existed before parametricism, and there are so many topics to explore. This is also true for school. So when you choose like in my case, it was a postgrad program. I would consider many aspects, not just what is the best school at the moment, but what is the best school for you. So
that's
at what
good.
point of your education are you? What are you really looking for? And exactly. So basically trying to build a pattern, an educational path that is working perfectly for you and for the person you are. Because there is no worse thing than doing what you don't feel like you should do, than being what you feel like you shouldn't be, right? So to me, that's the worst case scenario. So whatever you feel is important. Sometimes it's also important, even in the educational path, at some point it's important to say some like no, or being brave enough to take some decision, as long as this is as you feel that you are building yourself. That's the best part of your probably of your life, the exposure part, where you are kind of growing and building up who you will be in the future. So trying to get the most out of that.
Have you encountered a lot of competition in the places that you've been to?
For sure. But I would say that even here had a bit of surprise. I unexpectedly found more competition back in my school in Italy than Harvard. That's something that I always talk about, and it's funny, but it's true. I found much more like a sharing attitude in Harvard, which was great, which I immediately fell in love with. And perhaps instead, in a very isolated school back in Italy that maybe nobody knows, I found much more difficulty in like speaking about architecture, sharing experiences, trying to grow together. So yeah, even that was unexpected. And again, I can talk about that because I try to expose myself to different environments. So this is crucial. Going back to the previous question, again, trying to expose yourself to as many cultures, way of thinking the discipline and perspectives that you can. Yeah.
Thank you. That's really great advice. Thank you. And thank you for redefining what parametricism is about. I think that it's very interesting and the real way of looking at it. So I really hope that this is going to shine light into a lot of students that are trying to see, the path of being a parametric designer, but realizing that parametricism is about how you go about a design, not what makes you a person, right?
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was a great conversation.
Likewise. Thanks a lot.
Well, guys, there you have it. That was episode number 7 with Nicolas Turchi. Hope you have a wonderful week. Stay studying, stay ahead of the game, continue to pursue your dreams. See you on the next episode. And if you're not following yet, you have to follow The Archaeologist on social media. Do so right now. We're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, and many more. Also, you should go to our website, thearchaeologist.com. See you on the next episode, guys. Goodbye.